of change and virtual communication. So I'm excited to get started. I hope you are. Let's give a warm Toastmaster welcome to Alan Hoffler.
Seven seconds is a long time when you're the speaker. When you're listening online, 7 seconds feels like something had to have gone wrong. Is this mic on? Is this internet going down? But for our lesson tonight, 7 seconds is a very important period of time. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters, tonight we've got to decide, how do we make impressions in a world where all we get is a little 1-inch by almost 2-inch little screen? Fortunately for us, public speaking has been around a long time, and people have been studying it for a long time. Perhaps the first to write down anything about public speaking was a guy named Aristotle, some 2,400 years ago. He called them modes of persuasion. How do I get you to agree with me? Whether it's trying to convince your spouse that a vacation in the mountains would be better than a vacation at the beach, or you're trying to convince your boss that you really are worth that raise you asked for. How do we get people won over? We're trying to do it all the time. Aristotle believed there were 3 areas that went into that. The first he called ethos. Of course, he was using the Greek language. It really means the character of the person presenting. In that day, the character was known. You knew the person that was speaking to you. As I look on this call today, I recognized a few names that I've run across over the years, but I'm unknown to most of you, despite Bob reading that wonderfully made up introduction. Some of it's even true, as far as you know, but you don't know my character. All you're going to get out of tonight in terms of my character is what you see and infer. And yet Aristotle believed that was vital. He also believed that logos was important. That's where most of us live. When we're the expert, anything that ends in ology means that you're living in the world of Aristotle's logos, your content, your structure, your ability to use the right words. But Aristotle also recognized that there was this idea about the way that a person or an audience member thought, their emotions. He called it pathos. We might call it an interaction or an engagement or connectivity. But when it came down to it, his belief in what would persuade you was it was the speaker that would make the biggest difference. You may have all of your arguments lined up. You may be absolutely articulate and have your PowerPoint slides perfecto. But Aristotle believed that it was the impression that you create that had the greatest power of persuasion. Impressions are funny things. Consider when you're driving here in the Triangle. It's been nice in COVID to have a little less traffic on the roads, but we certainly expect that to build back up again. And imagine that you're zipping down the road and you notice the person next to you texting while driving. I know it's against the law, but an alarming number of people still do it. Or perhaps they're tailgating you. Well, you just infer that they're probably from Boston and ride on with it. Or they cut you off without a signal. Or the worst and most egregious of all driving sins, you're waiting in the Target parking lot with your signal on, waiting to get that spot on the front row, and a driver from the other way, shielded by the person backing out, takes your space. We have a word for people like that. In mixed company of Toastmasters and trying to impress you with my character, I'll just simply say we call them idiots. We don't really know that they're idiots, but that's certainly what we think they are. We even have a gesture for them. You might have been thinking I was going to put up another gesture, but it's the, really? You're going to act like that gesture? But consider if, I'm sure by accident, you commit one of those egregious sins against humanity. You accidentally follow too closely, or you cut somebody off without a signal, or you get to Target and notice that there's a spot on the front row and you zip in. Out of the corner of your eye, you noticed another car with its turn signal on, but you choose to ignore that. How do you view yourself in situations like this? Most often, you're not calling yourself an idiot. Instead, you're going, not just anybody could have pulled that off. I'm a pretty good driver. I do say so myself. And man, I'm blessed today to be getting that first row of parking. But it turns out that the person in the car that you cut off They're going, idiot, while you think you're great. The way we view ourselves is very different from the way others view us. And the only thing I have to convince you otherwise tonight is my behavior. We're going to take a look at three things. I'm going to ask some questions, and I invite you to unclick that mute button and chime in when the time comes. But we're going to look at three time periods or observations of when you can make that first impression. You make first impressions before you speak. Before you even get that introduction and say your first word, there'll be impression. You make an first impression when they first lay eyes on you, and you make another first impression when you open your mouth. When we start before we speak, you have a reputation. I was fortunate enough that Toastmasters sent out a note, and I'm pretty sure in the modern age that at least some of you stalked me online and found out what LinkedIn had to say about me or what Google thought I was like. And maybe you found some things about me that were less than stellar. There are a few of them out there. You have to dig a little bit, perhaps. I've tried to cover my tracks. There's also what we say before the time. I got on the call and was speaking to some of you and got welcomed in on the call. And if I just sat there, you might feel differently. First sight is visual, how I dress, what my setup looks like, what I see. And then, of course, those first words, how do I open up? And what style do I use? Here's where the number 7 comes in play. Is that in 2012, Forbes magazine ran an article and said that you have exactly 7 seconds to make that first impression. 7 seconds is a long time to pause for a speaker. It's not very long time to make an impression to try to persuade people. So here's a chance for you to chime in a little bit. Let's start with that first, before we get up to speak, let's start with our reputation. What is said about you? How can I help govern what is said about me in an online environment? What are some ways that I can use to help control what my reputation is?
Consistent behavior.
Consistent behavior, certainly. What else? This is before I ever get up to speak.
Gestures.
Gestures, but wait a minute, this is before I speak. I haven't done anything yet.
Professionally dressed.
I'm professionally dressed. We're going to get that too. It's also going to be an issue of what they see. It's certainly going to be an issue. What else?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth, which is that consistent behavior that we heard a minute ago. Am I the same person? If I talk to your coworker, will I get the same message as if I talk to your next door neighbor? Because the chances are good that my next door neighbor has talked to your next door neighbor, and my person at my work knows the person at your work. Fran? Okay. What about pre-speech interaction? We get on these calls with, I guess we got 4 some folks here tonight. I can't speak to every 41 of you, 43 of you, but what can I do to engage you and to make sure that I sound like a real person before my speech?
Kindness and
Kindness
and welcoming.
Smile.
Smile.
Yeah.
Be welcoming.
Yeah, eye contact.
Yes. Where's the eye contact in a web call?
The camera.
It's the camera. But the problem is you're all down here, and I have to look there to make it look like I'm looking at you, which is most unnerving. But notice that all these things go into making an impression before you ever hear me say a word. What typically happens pre-talk, and I was so encouraged tonight when I got on the call to hear people talking to one another, because nobody likes to walk into a room where everybody's just sitting silently looking at each other. That's true in the real world, and it's true online as well. If you're the host of a meeting, I highly encourage you to speak to the people as they come in, welcome them, just as you would in real life. Not make them feel weird or strange for showing up, but make them feel welcome. Maybe it's chit chat, but by all means, let's not sit around and go, well, we're just going to sit around and wait for everybody else to get here, and maybe everybody will show up eventually, and then we go quiet. It makes us feel like there's energy in the room. I was surprised to find out there were so many different clubs admitted tonight, because it just seemed like everybody was chatting and getting along, that you knew each other already. And that made me feel like I wanted to be part of you. That's a good thing. Before we ever speak, our reputation, our word of mouth, and our behavior gives an impression. But then there's an issue of when the video actually shows up, and this is true in a live environment too, is what we see. So we already heard someone say, hey, how I dress matters. This is odd in today's world because we seem to have lost a lot of formality. I spent 13 years in corporate. I worked for a company where it was notoriously casual. You could wear pretty much anything that covered your privates, and that would be good. Flip-flops and shorts were the schedule of the day. But as a trainer, a person that was in front of people training, I began to realize that the way that I dressed changed my attitude about the day, and it changed the way people responded to me. I had a coworker make fun of me because when I had a class, I would wear khakis and a shirt with a collar, which was formal for that particular organization. And she would say, oh, Mr. Fancy Pants today. And I began to realize that the way that I dressed mattered. But this is a screen capture that I have from a call I had this afternoon with a client. And notice that when you see it in static form, what draws your eye immediately in terms of distractions or what you see or cannot see based upon the Zoom call?
Some of them are looking at their phones.
Yes, it appears that they are. I had the same feeling. I didn't feel like I was really getting their attention and maybe it was first priority. What else?
When people just put their picture up, you don't have a good contact with them.
No, don't have any idea. One of the people put the picture up told me in chat, said, I just went to the dentist and I can't speak. And my thought was, what does that have to do with your face? I mean, unless they cut you open, you could at least show up and smile. You can't speak. Okay, what else?
Nobody's looking into the camera.
Very few. We had a couple, but very few. And it's made even worse by the size of their face. So if you look across the top row, you can see that there's several of people whose faces look like they're in a distance. And there's several other people who are lit or not lit in such a way that you can't see the details. And here's where we want to be professional in all situations, but I'm learning I'm notoriously cheap, among other things. Bob didn't catch that in my bio, but I'm learning that there's lots of ways on a very limited budget that you can help your calls online with simple lights. For instance, on this side of my room right over here, I have a Walmart lamp with 300-watt bulbs in it, bouncing off a wall to give light to this side of my face. And on this side of the room, I have a Home Depot $5.99 clamp light that I can reach that one so I can turn it off. And watch what happens when I do this. See my face? $5.99 plus a 100-watt light bulb, and I get a totally different feel for my face. I would also encourage you not to sit in front of a bright light. As you see, one of the people in that call was sitting in front of an open window and had this sort of halo look around their head and such that you couldn't see them. We want light on our face. Really easy to do, and it makes a great impression because you look a lot clearer, and the camera can actually focus better on you because it knows exactly what you are. You all look fantastic, your scales, and everybody has their camera up close. I don't want to slide far away from the camera and be in a distant, but I typically say I want your face to be at least half of the screen in general. It might be different if you're a speaker because you might want to have your whole body, especially in things like a speech contest. I know that's coming up here next month. If you want to be able to see gestures, then you might change that scale on purpose just to make sure that they can see your full body. But here we are just 10 minutes or so into this, and you already have an impression of me. It may be good. You may be going, hey, this guy's not telling me anything I need to know. I don't have any idea what your impression is, but you've got one. It's based upon what you found out about me, what my reputation was. Then you get to see me for yourself and find out that you either like or don't like me for whatever reason. And then we open our mouth. Many people believe that the speech opens when you start to speak. But notice that they've already seen you, and they've already got an impression of you based on your reputation. This is the last element of the puzzle, not the first. I have a wonderful phrase that I use in our workshops, and I say that you cannot lose something you don't have. And most people open and